Debate, the Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin my remarks by recognizing that we meet today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinabe people. I hope that one day we'll begin all our daily proceedings in this place with this acknowledgement. I also wish to acknowledge the land on which my riding is situated is Treaty 6 territory and the ancestral homeland of the Métis people. I'm extremely proud to rise in support of my colleague from Desnethé, Missinippi, Churchill River. I wish to recognize her connectedness to community, her hard work, her humbleness, and her humility, all qualities of a true leader. It is these qualities that have helped this House to realize soon the passing of her private member's bill, a bill that signals a step, one among many, we must take. One important step on our collective and our individual journeys towards reconciliation with Indigenous people. This bill provides the House with an opportunity to acknowledge and, most importantly, own its settler history. And what is this history? In the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's summary report, you'll find these introductory words. It is a reminder for why we are where we are today as a country, and why our support of the efforts and leadership of my honourable colleague are so important. I quote, "For over a century, the central goals of Canada's Aboriginal policy were to eliminate Aboriginal governments, terminate treaties, ignore Aboriginal rights, and through a process of assimilation, cause Aboriginal peoples to cease to exist as distinct legal, social, cultural, religious, and racial entities in Canada. The establishment and the operation of residential schools were a central element of this policy, which can be best described as cultural genocide," end quote. We are in an era where politicians talk about how important it is that the rights of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people are recognized, protected, and most importantly, enshrined explicitly into Canadian law. And some of us are actually acting on that talk. I speak of the work of my colleague, the member from Abitibi, Bay James, Nunavut, EU, to implement the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples into Canadian law with his Bill C-262, and the work of my colleague from Edmonton, Strathcona, who tried so hard to insert into Canadian environmental law the rights of Indigenous people as stated in Bill C-262. And today, I am able to add my colleagues' efforts to this list of efforts in this House for reconciliation and justice for Indigenous peoples in Canada. The bill before us today is amended from the original bill tabled by my honourable colleague. The original bill was to make June 21st National Indigenous Peoples Day a statutory holiday. Both in this House and in my community, my colleague, the member from Desnethé, Missinippi, Churchill River, articulated the many reasons for the proposal to designate June 21st a national statutory holiday. She spoke of her work as the Mayor of La Loche on this issue. She listed the history of Indigenous organizations calling for June 21st to be recognized as a national holiday. She told us of the spiritual significance of June 21st, the summer solstice for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And she acknowledged the history for many, many communities of celebrations and special commemorative ceremonies on June 21st. And my community of Saskatoon is one of those communities that has focused our efforts on June 21st. In recent years, Saskatoon has grown, the community has expanded, and we acknowledge reconciliation and the TRC's calls to action also on this day. For over 20 years, the Saskatoon Indian Métis Friendship Centre has hosted National Aboriginal Day, now National Indigenous Peoples Day, on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis people, and in my riding of Saskatoon West. Every year, thousands gather in my community, joined by Indigenous leaders and elders, non-Indigenous leaders, survivors of residential schools, provincial schools, day schools, survivors of the 60s scoop, and Indigenous veterans for activities and ceremonies to mark the day. And in recent years, the City of Saskatoon has marked the day with important ceremonies and commemorations honoring Indigenous people. Last year, the new name for the North Commuter Parkway Bridge was announced at the Indigenous Peoples Day event in Saskatoon. The new name, Chief Mistawasis Bridge, honors Chief Mistawasis, also known as Pierre Belanger, who was the head of the Prairie Tribe and signed Treaty 6 in 1876. At the unveiling, Mistawasis Nehihau Chief Darrell Watson said, "Today is a very monumentous occasion for my nation. It's part of the whole process of reconciliation. Chief Mistawasis, 140 years ago, began that process when he acknowledged the territory by welcoming newcomers to share the land. Reconciliation began for us when treaty was signed." In 2016, one of the national closing events of the TRC was held in Saskatoon on June 21st. This event galvanized community members and Indigenous and non-Indigenous community leaders in Saskatoon to begin to formalize our reconciliation efforts and to respond to the TRC's calls to action as a community. Reconciliation Saskatoon, with the organizational support from the Treaty Commissioner, is that community-wide response. Reconciliation Saskatoon is a community of over 98 organizations, nonprofits, business, faith communities, and partners who have come together to initiate a citywide conversation about reconciliation and to provide opportunities for everyone to engage in calls to action. Mr. Speaker, the path to reconciliation in my riding and my community has embraced June 21st, National Indigenous Peoples as the day. We worked hard to make that day inclusive of all peoples, a day where we work and we celebrate and we remember, and in so doing, help to build relationships and ultimately to build a better community for all. 3 years ago, we added a new event, a walk in my riding. It's called Rock, I knew I'd trip up on this, Rock Your Roots for Reconciliation, spearheaded by the Reconciliation Saskatoon. Last year, over 4,000 people participated in that walk. But today, Mr. Speaker, the bill before us has a different day, September 30th, to be designated as a statutory holiday, a day that honors the survivors of residential schools. This day is also observed in my community, and I acknowledge creating a national day to honor residential school survivors is Call to Action 80 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And although this bill started in a different place, it's here today after a parliamentary process that built support across political parties, and so it is a good day. We are here today in this good way of cooperation because of the work of a Desnethé woman leader who kept us focused on something much bigger than partisan politics, a goal to build a better Canada for future generations. Today, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to be her colleague and to belong to a party and to sit in a caucus that backs words with action. As a caucus, we must work every day to honor her voice and leadership, a Desnethé woman from northern Saskatchewan, the member for Desnethé, Missinippi, Churchill River. And finally, Mr. Speaker, today I remind all my honourable colleagues from both sides of this House that we all have to work together, and we all have work to do to truly honour and respect the authentic voices of Indigenous women in this House and in our communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Masicho, hi hi.